All right, so Unit 8, Systems of Equations. We've kind of started the last couple of days working on if you have an equation in standard form, change it to slope-intercept form because that's like the pre-knowledge we needed to really be able to do this unit. So that topic's not really part of this unit, but it was it's your prerequisite, something you've got to know how to do before we get into this. So systems of equations. Some of you had this last year if you were in Ms. Crowder's advanced class. It'll be a good review for you all. Some of you haven't seen this at all. So we're going to go through it step by step, take it kind of slow because I know this can be a pretty tough topic for some students. So if we take a look, systems of linear equations, what does that mean? So systems of linear equations are when you have more than one linear equation. And a linear equation is a straight line. So that would be like if you had a graph and that graph had 2 or 3 or 4 different straight lines on that graph. Those are linear equations. Most of the questions we have, pretty much all of them, when we really get into the assignments, are only going to have 2 equations. And you're going to look at those 2 equations and you're going to have to find the solution. And the solution of a system of linear equations is the point where the 2 lines intersect on a graph. So it's the point where the lines cross. So get your notes out, get a piece of paper so that you can write this down. These are the only 2 definitions you need to know. System of linear equation, it's when you have more than one linear equation. And then our goal is to take those 2 lines and find the solution. And the solution is going to be where do those 2 lines cross on a graph. All right. This gets used a whole lot when it comes to the business world and profit versus loss for companies, and where's their break-even point, where do they start to make money. For all of that, they use basically systems of linear equations. So if we take a look, when graphing, there's 3 different possibilities that you could get. But before we get to that, let's just take a look at this graph and kind of see, all right, you have 3 linear equations on this graph. You've got a purple one, a blue one, a red one. So if I was to say, what's the solution to the blue and the purple line, the solution would be where do they cross? So you would look, you'd find this point, you'd say, okay, what's this point? Where do they cross? So if you looked at that, go ahead and look at it and try and think to yourself, pause the video if you need to, and find what would that point be. Hopefully if you did that, you got that is the point -3, 3. Start at the origin, you go left 3, so -3 for your x, and then up 3, so +3 for your y. So that's the point -3, 3, and that would be your answer. Your answer is where do they cross? Where do they meet? All right, if you looked at the purple and the red line, we'd want to know what's the solution to those linear equations. So for the purple and red line, what would you get? So if you looked at those, pause the video if you need to, but looked at those, you would get 2, +3. You start at the origin, you would go to the right 2, up 3, so that's the point 2, +3. If I said, look at the blue and the red line, what's the solution to that system of equations? The solution is where do they cross? Well, they cross at over 1, down 1, so 1, -1. So that's all you're really going to have to do for this first part. It's going to be, I'm going to give you 2 equations. You're going to have to graph them and then see where they cross. However, they're not always going to be nice and perfect like this where they cross. There are 3 possible things that could happen. So for the vast majority of our questions, they're going to be one solution. You're going to actually be able to find an answer. You're going to have 2 lines, they'll cross, and the answer that you're going to write down is going to be what is the point where they cross. So most of your questions will look like that, and you would just type in your answer or write your answer. They cross at 3, 4, or -2, -3, or 1, -7, whatever point they cross at. Then you will get some that you'll graph them and they'll be parallel. Well, if they're parallel lines, they never cross, they never touch. So if I said, all right, what's the solution to these two lines? And you're like, well, they never touch, they never cross each other. So then your answer would be no solution. There is no solution. There's nothing that will work for both equations because they never touch. So no solution. And then if you get two lines and they're directly on top of each other, they touch here at this point. They touch at that point, at that point, at that point, at that point. They touch at every single point because they're directly right on top of each other. Those lines would be called, your answer would be infinite many solutions. There's infinite solutions. You could pick any of the points on those lines and that would count because it touches at every single one of them. So for your problems, these are the three things you could get. So parallel lines, they're lines that never intersect, they never cross. So since they never cross, your answer that you write down is no solution. Things that you'll start to notice is that when they're parallel lines, they have the same slope with different y-intercepts. So like for these two lines, they have the same exact slope. They both go up 2 over 1, so they both have a slope of 2, but the y-intercepts are different. And you'll start to notice with some of these, you won't have to graph them because as soon as you see the equation, you'll be able to look at the equation and see, oh, look, they've got the same slope but different y-intercepts. I know that means they're going to be parallel, so I know it's no solution. So at first you'll have to graph them, but eventually some of you will start to pick up on those little shortcuts. All right, same thing for if they're the same line. If they're the same line directly on top of each other, these lines are the same line. So since the lines are on top of each other, they're infinite many solutions. You'll notice for these, they have the same slope and same y-intercept. So if you get two equations and you notice, wait, the slope's the same in both of them, the y-intercept's the same, they must be the same line. So infinite many solutions. So like I said, some of you will start to notice that. If you don't, that's okay. You would just graph it, and as soon as you graphed it, you would notice they're on the same line. All right, so let's say I gave you this question. You've got these two lines, this system of linear equations, you graphed it, where do they cross? What's the solution? You would look at this. What do you think? You to figure it out, you decide. 1, 2, 3, or 4. What would you get? All right, you should have got the point 2, -2. They cross at 2, -2. All right, what about this one? Name the solution. Is it infinite solutions? No solution? Is it one solution? If it's one solution, you would write down the point where they cross. So if we look at these two lines, they do cross. Where do they cross? They cross right here, and that is the point 3, -1. So a couple things students have some trouble with on this one. If they are still struggling with, this is something you should already know how to do, but I'm going to go back over it in this video. If you're still struggling on, here's an equation, graph it, you might have some troubles with this. If you're still struggling with, here's the point, what's the coordinates for this point? If you're having trouble looking at a point and saying this is point 3, -1, that's something you might have trouble with. So this topic isn't really anything new. It's using information you should already have, but that's something we got to make sure you remember how to do so that you can do this topic. All right, so let's take a look at some little shortcuts, some reminders, things that when it comes to graphing lines, you might want to write these down just so you've got this little reminder. Remember, when you get an equation, y equals mx plus b, the number in front of the x is your slope, so it's going to tell us how to move. The number in the back is your y-intercept, so that's going to tell us where is it going to cross the y-axis. So this helps us graph our lines. If you get an equation like this where the number in the back is missing, that's because the b is a 0. So if you want to write +0 there, that can be helpful. The last 2 days we worked on this. You have an equation in standard form. We can't graph it in standard form. So in order to graph it, you have to change it to slope-intercept form. Quick reminder, if you get y equals a number and there's no x, that means it's going to make a horizontal line. You go on the y-intercept, go up to the x, or I mean you go to the y-axis, go up to the 6 and put a horizontal line there. If you get x equals 3 when there's no y, then that means it's a vertical line. So you go to the x-axis, go to the 3 and put a vertical line there. These are all things you should already know, but I'm giving you a quick reminder of them, which is why, if you go to do these problems, you're having trouble, I would come back to this slide, come back to this on the notes, write it down so you've got it, because this will be very helpful for some of these problems if you still struggle with graphing lines. So, and then remember, when you are looking for a point, the number in the front, your x, tells you going left and right. The y is for going up and down. So pause the video, write these down, make sure you have that. It will help you. All right, so moving on. Here we go. So I've got a graph. So I've got some examples here that I'm going to go through with you. So let's say I have y equals 2/3 x plus 2 and y equals 2x minus 6. All right, so I've got these two equations. I want to know what's the solution to that system of equations. After our winter break, we will go over how to do this without a graph. But for now, we're going to talk about, okay, I want to graph them. How do I solve this using a graph? How do I figure out what x equals and what y equals to make these equations the same? Will they cross? That's what we're going to find out. So first thing we have to do is graph them. Now, anytime you go to graph an equation, the easiest way to do it is to figure out what's the slope, so what's your m, and what's your b. That's the first thing I would write down. So I would look at this first equation and say, what's my slope? The slope is whatever's in front of the x. So my slope is 2/3. The b is what's in the back. The b is plus 2, so it's positive 2. So then when I go to graph it, I know I only have to go, all right, my y-intercept is 2. It's going to cross at 2. So on the y-axis, put a dot at 1, 2. Make this thicker. All right, and then how's it going to move? Well, the slope is 2/3. So remember, it's rise over run. So you're going to go up or down and then to the right. So if the slope is 2/3, I'm going to go up 2, 1, 2, over 3, 1, 2, 3. Put my dot there. And then make our straight line. I'm just following that same pattern of 2 and 3 so that I can then make our straight line. All right, so there you go. So take this equation, we graphed it. Now we do the same thing for this equation. So if I look, I'd say, okay, what's my m? Well, y equals 2x minus 6. What's in front of the x? It's a 2. So my slope is 2. And then what's the b? The number in the back is minus 6. So my b, my y-intercept, is negative 6. So then I've got to graph it. Remember, anytime your slope is a whole number, it helps if you just put it over 1. So then I'm going to start at negative 6 on the y-axis. So here's the y-axis. So I'm going to go to negative 6, put a dot. And then how is this going to move? You look at the slope. The slope is 2 over 1. It's going to go up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1. And then if I was you, up 2 over 1. The easiest thing is to just keep following that pattern until you hit the other line. So up 2 over 1, 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 up 2 over 1. And then it hits the line right there. So you can draw your line. The lines cross. Oops. The lines cross right. Switch colors. The lines cross right there. So that's your solution. What point is that? That is the point. Let's see, we gotta go over 6. So it's the point 6. And then up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's the point 6, 6. And that's the answer to the question. So these take a little bit more time because you have to graph both equations and then see where they cross. All right, so if you have questions, you can come to the Google Meets, you can email me, but for this part, this is the way it's going to work. You'll get 2 equations, you'll graph the equations, which is something you've already learned how to do, and then you will tell where the 2 lines cross. All right, so let's look at another one. All right, so let's say I've got, type this in, y equals 2x plus 1, y equals, or no, not y equals, let's do negative 4x plus 2y equals 2. So there's our 2 equations. M equals, v equals, because we want to figure out what the slope is and what the y-intercept is to graph it. M equals, v equals. So if we look at this first one, y equals 2x plus 1. So what's our m? Well, the slope is the number in front of the x. The m is the number in front of the x. So it's 2. And remember, anytime you get a whole number, it's helpful to just put it over 1. Our b is our y-intercept. Well, if we look at the equation, that's the number in the back. The number in the back is plus 1, so our b is 1. So we got what we need for the first one. So if we want to graph that, it crosses at 1. So go the 1 on the y-axis, it crosses there. How's it going to move? It's going to move up 2, 1, 2, over 1. So up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1. Now we can draw our line. All right, so there's our first one. Then we go look at the second one. Here is why we did that the last 2 days. Because if you have an equation like this, you cannot look at this and just say, okay, the m is what's in front of the x. So the m is negative 4, the b is the number in the back by itself, 2. That will not work. That is not the slope and the y-intercept for this equation. Before you can find the slope and the y-intercept, you must change this from standard form to slope-intercept form. You have to make it look like this one on the top, the y equals mx plus b. That's why we spent those 2 days going over that. So think back to the last couple of days. How did you do that? You took the x and moved it to the other side. So that gives us 2y equals the negative 4x. When you move it, becomes positive 4x, and then you have plus 2. So we did that. Then the next thing you had to do from that step was to divide each part by whatever is in front of the y. So we had to divide each part by, on this one, it's a 2, so divide everything by 2. So then if we do that, 2 divided by 2 cancels out. So I've got y equals 4 divided by 2 is 2, so 2x, and then 2 divided by 2 is 1, plus 1. So then if you get down here, some of you will quickly notice, wait a minute, it's the exact same equation. which means that it has the exact same slope, exact same y-intercept. So if it has slope of 2, y-intercept of 1, if it's the same exact equation, and you go to graph that, well, then you'll end up making the same exact line. And remember from the notes a few minutes ago, if you have the same exact line on top of each other, then that means your answer is infinite many solutions. Because no matter what, at every single point on this line, they touch. So this is an example of getting infinite many solutions. You take the two equations, you go to graph them, they make the same exact line, infinite solutions. All right, so we're going to do 2 more. So hang in there with me. We've got 2 more examples to look at, and then we'll be finished. Didn't mean to do that. Let's hit delete all of that. And let's look at our next one. So let's go to, erase that. I'll type this in here. We've got y equals x minus 1. And we've got x equals 2. So let's look at these. We want to find the slope. We want to find the b. We want to find the slope. We want to find the b. So if we look at this one, what's your m? The slope is whatever number's in front of the x. There's nothing there, so it's a 1. So then what's the slope? The slope is 1, so you can just make it 1 over 1. And then what's your b? What's the number in the back? It's a minus 1, which means we're going to cross at -1. So we can go ahead and graph that. We know that it's going to cross at -1, so we go down to -1 and put a dot. And then we look at our slope. It's 1 over 1, so our slope's going to go up 1, over 1, up 1, over 1, up 1, over 1, and it's just going to keep doing that. So we can go ahead and follow that pattern and then draw the line going through it. So there's our first equation, slope of 1, y-intercept of -1. Now we come down to our next one, and oh, look at this one. X equals 2. There's no y, so we don't need these because it's one of our special ones. And if you went back and wrote down this, anytime you just have x equal a number, you know it's going to be a vertical line. Hopefully you wrote these down so you've got this. It'll be a vertical line. So we're just going to go to 2 on the x-axis. So we're going to the x-axis, going to +2, put a dot there. So we have a dot at 2 on the x-axis. So we go to the x-axis, find 2, and then it said it's going to be a vertical line. So then we're just going to make a vertical line. And then we're able to look at it and see, where do they cross? They cross right there. Well, what point is that? That is the point 2, 1 over 2, up 1. So you have the point 2, 1. Pretty simple. That's all you're doing. Take the two equations and you're just graphing them. If you need to pause the video to look at it a little bit longer, you can do that. That's all you're going to do. And then our last one, you've got y equals -1/2 x plus 4, and you've got y equals -1/2 x minus 3. So there's our two equations. Find your M, find your B, find your M, find your B. And those of you that write it down, and write down the M, write down the B, you write down these, you do all these steps, you will get more of your, even though it'll take you longer to write the stuff down, you will get done with your assignment faster because you won't make as many mistakes. So we wrote these down. Now let's look. What's the M? The M is whatever's in front of the X. So -1/2. What's the B? The B is the number in the back, which is 4. So we put our 4. Now we can go ahead and graph it. It will cross at 4. And how will it move? -1/2. So since it's negative, it's going to go down 1/2. Down 1/2. Down 1/2. Down 1/2. And it'll just keep following. They'll keep following that pattern. Down 1/2. There we go. So let's take a look at our next one. Just hang in there. We're almost done. It's our last example. So slope -1/2. Our B is -3. So if we take a look at this, go to graph that. It's going to cross at -3. The slope is -1/2. So down 1/2, down 1/2, down 1/2, and so on. So when you go to graph that one, looks like that. And then you notice, oh, I've got two parallel lines. They will never ever cross. So my answer is no solution. There's no solution because they never touch, never cross. So we can't find an answer. Now, some of you, like I said, will start to notice things as you're doing these problems, and you'll notice, wait a minute, I got -1/2 for the slope and -1/2 for the slope again. Anytime you get the same slope but have different y-intercepts, it's going to be no solution. That's going to be a parallel line. They have the same slope, so they're moving the same, but they cross at different points, so they'll never touch. So that's one of those things where some of you could have looked at this and immediately gone, same slope, different y-intercept, it's no solution. So there are little shortcuts you can take to try and make sure you can do some of the problems faster. But that's all you're going to be doing first for these assignments is you've got two equations, make sure they're in slope-intercept form, graph them. If they cross, write the point where they cross. If they never touch like this one, you write no solution. And if they end up being the same exact line, you write infinite many solutions. So if you're confused, if you want to go over some of these together, come to the Google Meets and we'll do that. If not, you can email me, but that's it. So if you have questions, let me know. Other than that, thanks for watching. Sorry, it's a little bit longer of a video. There's a little bit more to this topic than the ones we've been doing, but I will talk to you all later.